Thank you, guys. That was very beautiful. We're going to dismiss the children now. And in a minute, Paul Mitchell is going to share the word with us from Psalm 131. For a few years now, we've done a preaching practicum, different people a little bit each time. And so the next 5 weeks, we have different guys preaching on several of the Psalms. And the reason we're doing this is because it helps develop people who can have the skill of teaching and preaching better. And that's a wonderful gift to the church. It can be used here in our church, but it'll also be used probably in other churches as they maybe when they're older and they move. But it also helps us to hear the word through other voices. Voices we know and trust, but are different than Nathan or I. So I'm looking forward to this. And I do want you to know that we have been meeting together for, I think, probably 6 weeks now previous to this, every week, and we're continuing to meet together. So these guys have put a lot of work into this, meeting together weekly, giving up a Sunday night for several months, as well as the preparation for their own sermon. So anyway, Paul Mitchell will be coming in a minute. And before that, Lene, his wife, is going to come and read Psalm 131.
Psalm 131. My heart is not proud, O Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have stilled and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore.
Happy Father's Day. I was kind of disappointed when I learned that the project was wrapped up on Friday. Not because it doesn't look great, but because a half-finished project would have really felt like we decorated for Father's Day. But we're going to be, like I said, in Psalm 131. Feel free to go ahead and turn there. I don't think of myself as a particularly anxious person. I think of myself as pretty laid back, as pretty relaxed. Except, like most things I think about myself, it's not exactly true, is it? I got to tell you, just on Friday, I was walking on some back roads behind our house. We're on the south of Franklin, so you can really get into some of those back roads where there's not a whole lot besides some spread out houses. And I was walking along, and I was in this section talking about how I'm not an anxious person. And 3 dogs run out of this house and book it towards me, barking and growling. And I have that moment where I'm going like, I really hope there's an invisible fence here somewhere. I found out there wasn't when they were in the middle of the road, a couple feet from me, and one of them's a Rottweiler. I don't remember the others. I might have been in panic mode. And I'm going like, okay, I don't want to run away because I'm pretty sure that's not what you're supposed to do. I don't want to confront them because I'm pretty sure that's not what you're supposed to do. So I'm just kind of casually pretending to walk along while also sort of yelling at them. But that's how life can feel, right? I had this plan, this walk, this time scheduled and set apart to work on just being in prayer and practicing this sermon, and then all of a sudden things are very much outside my control. And that wasn't a part of my plan. You know, there are a couple of personality traits that I have, and maybe you can relate to these, things that keep me from sometimes being that relaxed, calm person I'd like to be. And one of them is that I'm a bit of a problem solver. If I am presented with a problem, I would very much like to fix it before continuing on. The second is that I'm a little bit of a peacemaker. If I'm in conflict with someone, I would like to get that resolved. I sometimes have trouble giving people the space they need in order to process through that. What's maybe even worse is if I see other people in conflict, I have trouble not trying to step in and mediate that. Ask me how many times that's backfired. But this desire to resolve conflicts, this desire to fix problems, it can cause issues, especially when I run into situations that are far outside my control. I want to share something that Linnea and I have been walking through a little bit. You see, about 3 years ago, Linnea's mom went in for kind of a routine outpatient surgery, a heart ablation. And that routine outpatient surgery turned into an emergency open heart surgery and weeks in the hospital. And I remember sitting on our couch and just holding Linnea. And she was pregnant with Everly, our daughter at the time. And I remember just mourning that her mom might not get to meet our daughter. And thankfully, there's stories about how God worked in that, and her mom pulled through. And not only did she get to meet Everly, amongst Linnea's siblings, she got to meet 3 other grandchildren besides. But a couple of weeks ago, they came for a visit. And her mom sat us down on a couch and said she needs another heart ablation. And it's happening at the end of the month, about a week away. And we find ourselves again just waiting in a situation where we have almost no control. But maybe you don't have something like this going on in your life. Maybe it's not something big. Maybe it's not something that readily comes to mind. But there's still always this almost background noise of anxiety in our lives. I think part of it is, back in 1830 was the first time that the majority of Americans had access to a newspaper. And so now, not only did you know about the problems in your community, with your acquaintances and maybe your family, but now you could know about the problems and issues across the nation and across the world. 1930, for the first time, the majority of Americans had access to a radio. So you weren't limited to just what was in the newspaper. You could flip that on at any time and learn what was going on. 1950, first time the majority of Americans had a TV. Now, not only did you hear about those problems and issues, you got to see them. 1999, the first time the majority of Americans had access to a computer. And the rise of the internet, now you're not only restricted to what someone presents to you, you can go hunt for this stuff. I can Google what symptoms I have and figure out the 5 worst diseases it could be. 2013, the first time majority of Americans had access to a smartphone. And now not only do I have access to something that is kind of encapsulates the newspaper and the radio and the TV and the personal computer, I can take it with me wherever I go. And so much of this information that we have as it comes in is meant to provoke fear and outrage. But there's nothing I can do about it. And so it leads to just this background noise of anxiety and being overwhelmed. I've been thinking about it as the icing on our anxiety cake. And Psalm 131 wants to speak into all of this. It wants to be an antidote for our anxiety, for our fear. I don't think about myself as a particularly anxious person. Except like most things I think about myself, it's not exactly true, is it? Our main point for today, leaning into God as a loving parent requires humility, but it lets us leave behind anxiety and find comfort. So let's go ahead and pray, and we'll get into the text. Lord, thank you already for the time just to slow down, to hear your word in the songs, in the scripture. Pray that you would just help us to be open. You know how many times my mind can be a million different places than where I currently am. Lord, would your Spirit just ground us today? In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Now, I want to begin by noting the kind of psalm that this is. You know, we don't always know how different psalms were used in the life of ancient Israel, but in this case we do, because Psalm 131 is a song of ascent. The songs of ascent run from about 120 to 134. And here's how they were used. You see, Jerusalem was built at a high elevation. On the west, you have kind of it slopes down into lowlands leading to the Mediterranean Sea. On the east, you have it where it drops off, going down to the Dead Sea, one of the lowest places on earth. And on this kind of mountainous ridge in the middle is built Jerusalem. And one of the highest places in Jerusalem is the Temple Mount. And so several times a year, as Jews would come for these festivals, they would be on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and they would be walking up. And as they were making this journey, they would sing the songs of ascent as they are going up. And as they did so, they would sing Psalm 131, which reads like this: My heart is not proud. Lord, my eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or with things too wonderful for me. And I love this, right? Because as these pilgrims are approaching the temple, as they're journeying to Jerusalem, as they're approaching the dwelling place of God, they're singing about humility. They're saying, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. It takes humility to approach God. And this is something that we see all through Scripture. We could look at Psalm 25, which tells us God guides the humble and teaches them. We could look at Proverbs 3, which tells us that God opposes the proud and shows favor to the humble. We could look at Micah 6, which tells us there's nothing we need to be doing other than to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Or Luke 18, where Jesus said, everyone who exalts themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. If humility is so important when I'm approaching God, I want to make sure and have a good understanding of what humility really is. You see, this is something that I got wrong when I was younger. I'm sure you've heard this before, but humility is not having a low opinion of ourselves. When I was in high school, I was pretty decent at math. I enjoyed it. And yet I would often downplay that because for some reason I thought that's what humility meant. I thought that was being humble. But those attempts always came across sounding false. Because they were. That kind of humility sounds false because it doesn't correspond with reality. Instead, real humility is having an accurate understanding of our own importance and abilities. An accurate understanding of our own importance and abilities. As I've been kind of just sitting in this week, I've been thinking about things that are kind of parts or maybe aspects of humility, the ingredients that go to make it up. And in part, I think it means acknowledging our flaws and shortcomings. We probably understand that. But also it means acknowledging our limits, which are not flaws and shortcomings. Our limits that are just a part of being human. I think a part of humility means knowing the inherent value of myself and everyone else, of everyone who's made in the image of God. And then part of humility is knowing just that our talents and our strengths are a gift from God and are best used in partnership with Him. And so when we start to put these together, we get this picture of a humility that radically corresponds to reality, that lets me feel valued and loved, that sees God working in me and in those around me and rejoices in all of it, that doesn't feel the need to elevate myself. And so I love this picture of these pilgrims journeying to the temple. And as they climb higher and higher towards Jerusalem, they're literally singing a song about not elevating themselves, reminding themselves and one another to stay humble before God. But there's a particular focus that the psalmist goes to next, a particular expression of humility. They say, I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. We've already talked about how a humility that corresponds to reality acknowledges our limits. I don't need an answer for everything. Not everything is my responsibility. You see, what happens when I start thinking God owes me an answer to everything? When I feel like I need to be involved in all of the big decisions that are going on around me, how easily that mindset can turn me back to pride and throw any progress towards humility I've been making. In these moments, there's a couple of passages out of John that come to mind. One is when Jesus, right before the ascension, was talking to the disciples, and he said, look, I have much more to tell you, more than you can now bear. And that gives me pause, right? Because it means there are moments where I'm looking for an answer from God. I'm looking for an explanation. I'm looking to understand what's going on around me. Or maybe I'm looking to be able to do something. And I'm just not ready. I need to continue to let the Spirit transform my heart and my mind. I need to keep drawing closer to God and trusting His timing, including His timing of when I begin to understand what He's doing. The second section I think of is when Peter was asking what was going on with another disciple. And Jesus says, look, what is that to you? That has nothing to do. You follow me. And so there are going to be times where I maybe want to understand something or I want a specific responsibility. But it's not primarily about me. It's about someone else. Maybe another disciple. In short, it's just none of my business. And I'm pretty sure that's one of the forgotten Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mind their own business. And so these pilgrims heading to the temple to meet with God sing a song about humility, about accepting their limitations, because they want to remind themselves of the same thing that we're here to be reminded of today. And that is that leaning into God as a loving parent requires humility. Imagine for a second if you sang this on your way to church every week, in your car. Lord, I'm not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I don't concern myself with matters too great for me. How would that change your mindset? How would that change your interactions with those around you, or how you approach God? To approach God each and every time with humility. But the psalmist has more to say. Look down in verse 2. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I'm like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. And so far, the psalmist has spoken in the negative. They've said, look, I'm not proud. I'm not haughty. I don't concern myself with things too great or difficult for me. And now the psalmist turns to what they are doing. I've calmed and quieted myself. And notice this happens only after the psalmist has admitted their limitations. It's hard to calm and quiet myself when I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. It's hard to calm and quiet myself when I feel like everyone is relying on me, when I feel like I'm the glue that's holding everything together. But God is the sustainer of all things, not me, not you. Jesus said the burden of being his disciple was light. And how many times in that moment, in my heart and in my mind, do I almost instinctually call him a liar? Light? Really? Lord, I've been following you for years. Light? But that just means I haven't yet learned one of the first lessons, and that's that I can trust God. I can take those burdens and surrender them to him. And instead, too often, I do the exact opposite. God, you're not handling this right. I'll take it. You're not handling this right. I'll take that one too. If we can stop being proud and accept our limitations, we can begin to calm and quiet ourselves before God. And then the psalmist gives us a picture of what this looks like. The psalmist says, look, like a weaned child with its mother, I am content. The picture of the rocking chair, it's been in my family for quite a while, at least goes back to my grandfather. And it was kind of fun because my dad got to go up to Indy a couple of weeks ago when the Antique Roadshow was in town and got to take it and just wanted to learn some more about it. And turns out it comes from probably the 1890s, maybe Pennsylvania or Michigan. But the reason I have it up here is because I have some vague memories, fuzzy, but there, of my mom rocking me in this rocking chair. And now I get to be on the other side of that, and I get to see Linnea rocking our kids. And the rest of the day with the kids can be emotional and hectic, and it's full of movement, and it's full of activity, and there are tempers and tantrums and tears. But for that window of time, when they're rocking in a parent's arms, they're calm, they're quiet, they're content, and it feels like a miracle. And maybe you can think back to a time with your own parents when you didn't feel the weight of responsibility that you do now. Think back to a time when you had someone you felt would protect you, would provide for you. And no matter what was wrong, you could run to that parent and jump into their arms and be held. And it might not change your circumstances, but somehow things started to feel right again. I know not everyone had those kind of parents, but I am convinced that's how Scripture wants us to see God. Right? Think of the story of the prodigal son. As the son is returning home, dejected, crushed, convinced that he'll never be welcomed back to the family, convinced the best he can hope for is to be a servant. And as that son starts to utter this long rehearsed apology, he's cut off. He's interrupted. Not with rejection, but with an embrace. Because he's loved. I love what Isaiah 40:11 says. It says, God tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. We're the children of God. We're the ones who are held. But notice, the psalmist doesn't just say like a child with its mother. It says like a weaned child with its mother. Why that distinction? When my kids were young, they would cry for mom because they were hungry, because they needed something at 2 a.m. But in a way, it's almost sweeter now, even at 2 a.m. Because when they cry for mom, it's not always because they need something. Sometimes it's just because they love her, because they want to be near. It's a choice now and not just an instinct. Early on in our Christian journey, our instinct can often be to cry to God because we need something. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't grow out of that. I hope my kids always need things from Linnea and I. Jesus is the one who taught us to ask for our daily bread. We'll always look to God for provision. But as the Spirit continues to transform us, something happens, and we come to desire nothing more than just the nearness of God. In good circumstances, in bad circumstances, it becomes about just simply being in His presence. And the psalmist describes someone who has set aside pride, who knows they don't have everything figured out, but who has quieted and calmed themselves and is now content just being in the presence of God. And the picture that comes to mind is of a weaned child with its mother, curled up in her arms, not because it needs something, but because it just wants to be held. It just wants to find comfort and contentment in those arms. Leaning into God as a loving parent requires humility. But it lets us leave behind anxiety and find comfort. And so this is just the simple picture I hope we take into this week. Not everything depends on us. We don't have to understand everything. There are a bunch of things my kids don't understand yet. We can humbly come to God, not because we need something, but just to be in His presence. To be held by the one that holds all of our days in His hand. We can quiet ourselves. And the psalmist ends with this invitation. Israel, put your hope in the Lord now and forevermore. And so what is it for you? Where does your life feel like it's out of your control? Or maybe just out of control in general? Where has pride lied to you, telling you you desperately need to get that control back? You don't. We're going to take a few minutes to start doing what this psalm is encouraging us to do, just to quiet and calm ourselves. Nathan and Abby are going to come up, and we're going to close in part with a song called Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. And this song was inspired by Deuteronomy 33:27. And that verse reads, "The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? I'm safe and secure from anything that the world would consider alarming because I'm in my Father's arms." And this week, maybe this looks like identifying the things that are causing anxiety in your life, but don't stay there. Please don't stay there. Take that step of surrender. Take that step of quieting and calming yourself. Of taking time just to enjoy the presence of God. You've already heard about it a few times, but on Saturday we've got the silent retreat coming up. Boy, if that just wasn't a great lead in, huh? A great opportunity to just put this into practice. So we're going to take a few moments, and as Abby and Nathan play, we're just going to let the Spirit work on us. Help us calm and quiet ourselves in the way that we probably can't right now. And then, staying seated, we're going to do what the psalmist would have us do and sing, encouraging one another of the great love God has for us, reminding ourselves that He is our Father and we are held.